je suis très contente que vous êtes là, malgré le fait qu'il s'approche et malgré le fait que maintenant tout le monde pense que donc il faut déjà partir, préparer les tables pour Christmas, acheter des cadeaux. Il fait un peu froid et donc il peut-être n'est plus là. Merci d'être présent. Et je passe très rapidement la parole à Alexandra. Alexandra, if you want to say a little bit about our seminar and to start our presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for attending our seminar today. It is focused on religious heritage, and this topic lies on the crossroads on heritage studies, religious studies, and many other disciplines. So we will try to discuss it from different perspectives. And our research group, our working group, is focused on critical heritage studies in post-socialist space, and we try to focus this year on the heritage, on the problem of heritage and war in more broad perspective of the post-Soviet and post-socialist space, particularly discussing also the ongoing conflict in Ukraine and the tensions and conflicts around different heritage. It's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. It's Andriy Fert. Andriy Fert holds a PhD from the National University of Kyiv-Mogilyanska Academia in Ukraine and is now currently a lecturer at Kyiv School of Economics. He was a research fellow at the Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna and joined the international research project for secular approach to memory processes in Central and Eastern Europe. Since 2017, he has been working for the Institute for International Cooperation of the Deutsche Volkshochschule Verband, coordinating projects related to history education in secondary schools in Ukraine. He has been a member of the International Working Group on Lived Religion in Eastern Europe and Eurasia since 2019. And now he also a fellow at the Center for East European International Studies in Berlin. So we have about 20-25 minutes for each presentation. And after that, we will open floor for the discussion. Probably, sorry for this misorganization. After Andrei, we can probably introduce our second speaker. And before each presentation, we can introduce each speaker, right? Is it will be fine? Okay. So Andrei, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander. Good evening. I didn't expect that my presentation would be so long. I thought it would be just Andriy Fert, historian, but thank you for listing all these things. And the funny thing about that is that I've been a member of several German institutions, and the ironic situation is that I don't speak German. So it's a shame, but fortunately now German people are very good at English. So good evening. And if you allow me, I just will share my screen in a second. So can you see it?
Yeah.
Great. So I will try to present this presentation as shortly as possible, as not to steal time from anyone else. And I want to focus on very interesting phenomena that is taking place in Ukraine at the moment. In a time of the Russian invasion, it became like very, very important and very prominent, and it's called decolonization. As it's probably as a scholars you've come along decolonization quite so often in recent years, and there's another specific sub-decolonization in this broader framework that's taking place in Ukraine, which is called spiritual decolonization, and I would like to focus on this in my today's presentation. Specifically, what I'm interested in is how this decolonization rhetoric, how this decolonization processes influences the veneration of saints by some specific Orthodox church we have in Ukraine. Yeah. Is that a question or? Okay, yes, I see. Okay, so the first thing that I have to say from the beginning is that this Orthodox church in the title of my presentation is not just Orthodox Church in general, because in Ukraine we have like many Orthodox churches, and you can easily get confused in their rivalry and how the difference is, and etc. So I'm focusing on one specific Orthodox church, which is called Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And some typically add to this wording, this phrase of the Moscow Patriarchate. So it's that church that for a long time has been the part of the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate. And in my presentation, I say no longer with question mark, because no one knows if it's really break the ties with the Russian Orthodox Church or not. So discussions are going on, and I'm not going to contribute to that discussion because I'm not an expert in Orthodox ecclesiology, so don't expect answers from me about whether this church belonged to the Moscow Patriarchate or not. So that's one thing. And another thing that's very important about this church is that it's increasingly being portrayed in Ukraine by media, by politicians, by statesmen, by influencers, by whoever, as a pro-Russia organization. So if you Google Ukrainian Orthodox Church in Ukrainian, you would likely run into some entries, some news, some expert column, whatever, that effectively says that this is a sort of a Russian influence, instrument of Russian influence, instrument of Russian soft power, etc. And this church is the biggest religious organization in Ukraine, despite this constant decrease in number of people who says they belong to this church, I mean, during the sociological surveys, but still it unites more than 10,000 parishes across Ukraine, which really makes it really influential and really big. And so today I'm going to be talking about this church that is big, but is very unpopular and is being represented as some pro-Russia institution in Ukraine. So another thing, so before we go to this spiritual decolonization, so I want to talk about my sources. So what's this going to be about? So I'm going to talk about how the spiritual decolonization affects veneration of saints, and I based my observations on the interviews that I collected with the rank and file priest, parish priest, and parishioner of this church. So in the slide, you can see the exact numbers of interviews that I collected. So this is in-depth, semi-structured interviews. It's not a representative samples, obviously, because it's impossible to do a really representative study, especially in the times of war, especially of the institution that is, to put it mildly, is being perceived by the society as pro-Russia organizations. And obviously the people inside of it are very suspicious of any outsiders. And given that I'm not religious, given that I'm not a member of this church, it was really hard to recruit people to talk with me, to do interviews with them. So basically, I have 27 interviews with priests and parishioners, and I have 12 more unrecorded conversations, because many priests and parishioners says we don't want to be recorded, just for our safety, etc. All these are anonymous, obviously, and we can discuss the selection of it probably during the discussion, as not to take time, because it's really important and some additional constraints of my observations. So the baseline is that it's not representative. It's about the variety of approaches that exist within this church without assessing how spread those views and approaches are. So that's the basis. And this interview has been collected this year, and quite recently I've completed the publication about it, which will be out, I imagine, next year, because the reviews were good, so I can happily expect it to be published. Okay, so going to this decolonization problem and spiritual decolonization or whatever. So basically, I give you just one example in this slide of how people talk about decolonization. I mean, the expert community, etc., talk about the decolonization. And it's a broader consensus that decolonization is something about getting away of cleaning the public space from the Russian imperial elements or whatever. And it is like another widespread consensus that part of this decolonization is to do something with this pro-Russia church, to get away from this pro-Russia church, to do something about it. So basically this quotation that I put in the slide, so this decolonization, our spiritual decolonization, as many state officials put it, is mostly about the forcing the parishes of this pro-Russia, in quotation marks, church, to transfer from this church to the correct one, to the more pro-Ukrainian one, to the one that Ukrainian society endorses. So it's mostly about that. But at the same time, several priests, religious activists, even state officials of this specific service in the Ministry of Culture that is responsible for overseeing religious affairs talks about a very specific thing that Ukrainian Orthodox Church does in a time of war. They spread, once again, in quotation mark, because I'm saying in their words, it spread pro-Russian narratives, it spread pro-Russian practices, especially it promotes Russian symbols like the symbols of the Russian Empire and venerates some controversial historical figures as saints. And this really attracts a lot of attention and a lot of outcry in the Ukrainian society. So basically, in this slide, there's two examples. I mean, if you Google it in Ukrainian, you would find like dozens of them. So every day something of that sort appear, that some activist or some member of parliament or some local authority guy or some volunteer just happened to be near the church of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine, just happened to get inside, and what he sees inside, obviously, he sees that either the icon of Russian Emperor Nicholas II, who is canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church and by Ukrainian Orthodox Church as a part of the church, obviously, so they venerate Nicholas II, or they happen to see the Alexander Nevsky images, so this pillars of Russian propaganda, pillars of Russian regime. So basically the narrative goes like that. So someone came to the church, see the icons there of these controversial saints, and then the scandal begins, and the local activists, blocked the church and forced the local priests to get rid of these Russian icons, as it's been described in the media, and forget that they have that such saints. So to do something about the churches that have these icons, to do something with these icons, to do something with veneration practices is really something that many religious activists, many state officials discuss at the moment. And last year, this institution, the state institution that I mentioned earlier, that is responsible for overseeing religious affairs, even held a roundtable about how to refurnish the church interiors to get rid of these Russian imperial symbols, including the icons of Nicholas II and Alexander Nevsky. And yes, one more thing. So when we talk about this spiritual decolonization, it's not a deliberate project of somebody, or not a movement as well as the typical classic movement is, that's coordinated, has its leaders, whatever. So it's the idea that is being represented in different words by different people from different institutions, state institutions, civil society, or whatever. But basically, it's about several things. So firstly, to ban the Church of the Moscow Patriarchate during the war, because it spreads like pro-Russian narratives, against in quotation marks, to force the parishes of this church to leave it, and also to do something with these controversial icons and controversial saints that this church has. So another thing that we have to mention at this point, and you probably know it, so I won't be stopping for too long here. So it's this link between the national identity and religious identity that is being easily spoiled in Eastern Europe, especially after the communism. So so here's the examples of this famous survey that the Pew Research Center and the team of the Pew Research Center, led by anthropologist Katie Warner, did a couple of years ago in 2017, that found that in post-Soviet countries, people tend to say that it's important to be, for example, Orthodox, to be like truly Russian or truly Ukrainian or whatever. So this figure says that like more than half of the Ukrainian population agreed with this statement, that's important for them to be Orthodox, to be truly Ukrainian. Although it should be said that I treat such conclusions like rather with skepticism a little bit, because, well, yes, for many people it's important, but still the church influence and the real influence of this link in the Ukrainian society is rather mild and not very strong. So people tend to think of religion as very important, of orthodoxy, of Orthodox Christianity as rather very important part of their national identity, only in cases when it goes about the Russia-Ukrainian conflicts, Russia-Ukrainian war, Russian-Ukrainian clash, whatever. So whenever there's something about the Russian-Ukrainian divide, yeah, religion became like very important. Yes, in other instances, no one mentions that religion is important to their daily life or to their feeling of their national identity, to their national tradition, etc. And Catherine Warner, actually, she wrote a fantastic book just on the eve of the Russian invasion, and it's in open access, actually, so you can see it in the slide, where she describes it in more nuanced way than I do in my confusing presentation, so you can go and read it and see it in a little bit more interesting way that I present. So the baseline that I'm trying to say that, yes, the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox Christianity in Ukraine, people agree that it's really some important thing about the national identity, important part of national identity, but at the same time, it's mostly about this anti-Russian sentiments, mostly about this anti-Russian feelings that are growing increasingly in the Ukrainian society, given the ongoing war that is happening. So it's create this, well, obvious framework for the spiritual decolonization to came to the stage. Yeah. So the Orthodoxy is something important to us, and it has this Russian influences. So in order to protect our national identity, we need to do something with this Russian influences on the church. So that's where the spiritual decolonization comes in. And another very important thing that I want to stress at this point is that from what these people who speak about the spiritual decolonization, for what they basically says, it's just looms behind it prominently that the veneration of saints is something like commemorating some historical figures, and Ukrainians, it's just so happen, are very sensitive to the question of commemorating historical figures. And especially because starting in 2014, we have like several periods of active rethinking of certain historical periods, certain Russian historical figures. Yes. So in this slide, you see these two, like the most interesting, most emotive examples of this rethinking. Yeah, so we have Lenin apart, so mass demolition of the monuments to Vladimir Lenin, and also Pushkin apart, the mass demolition of the monuments to Alexander Pushkin. So basically, what these people who advocate the spiritual decolonization tells us about the veneration of Nicholas II or Alexander Nevsky or someone else, like Matrona Moskovskaya, for example. I think Zhanna Kormina would like that. So it's basically about saying that veneration of this saints is something like, commemorating or observing and preserving memory of Lenin or preserving memory of Pushkin. Yeah, so it's something unacceptable for the present day Ukraine that is going through this process of decolonization. And I think this is one of the best examples when somebody summarizes in just in one quotation this problem of Russian saints in quotation marks. So this is a Ukrainian theologian, Darina Morozova, and she doesn't like Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, obviously. And what she says basically that by venerating saints like Nicholas and Alexander Nevsky, the church promotes this Russian narratives that glorify Russia. Yeah. So and she says that it's wrong. We should do something about it. The churches should not promote the veneration of this sort, because in a way we promote the Russian narratives by doing this veneration. And she lists like a couple of saints whom she thinks the most controversial that Ukrainian Orthodox Church still venerates. So basically that's Fyodor Ushakov, Andriy Bogolyubsky, Jonah of Moscow, Matrona of Moscow, and the most controversial are the two, Nicholas II and Alexander Nevsky. They are most controversial not because they have something that these four guys don't have, or like Matrona Moskovskaya doesn't have, but simply they're more popular. With Matrona Moskovskaya, it's a little bit more difficult, so we can get back to that during the discussion. So basically, if we take a look at how many temples are dedicated, so how many temples of the Orthodox, of this Ukrainian Orthodox Church are dedicated to all of these saints. So basically, we would see no one of these four, but we would see like a lot dedicated to Alexander Nevsky, and like impressive number of those dedicated to Nicholas II, or to the royal martyrs and confessors as they're represented in the church calendar. So they are popular as compared to the other Russian saints, and that is why they attract attention, especially Nicholas II, because, well, he's Russian emperor and the last one, and he was not, as far as we know, the very ardent supporter of the Ukrainian national movement. So it's obviously that these guys attract attention, and Alexander Nevsky, who has been used by the Russian propaganda since Peter the Great, as far as I remember. So it's no wonder that this too attracts the most attention of those people who go and literally inspect churches and take a look whether they still venerate these Russian saints or not. So here, there's, like I mentioned it earlier, we have another Orthodox church in Ukraine, and this church has nothing to do with the Moscow Patriarchate. And it's interesting to note at this point that this discussion about veneration of Alexander Nevsky and other Russian saints, including Nicholas II, was so harsh at the end of 2023 and at the beginning of 2024, that this another church, at the beginning of this year, they even took away all the saints from their calendar. So there's been no a really specific process of decanonization of them. They simply took them away and decided not to venerate them anymore. So I can share the presentation later on if you need that. There's this links, then you can read a little bit more about the reasons they took them away. But the thing is that unlike this church of the Moscow Patriarchate, another church took the saints away at the beginning of this year because the public outcry was so powerful and people criticized the church for having the saints on the calendar, accusing the church of spreading pro-Russian narratives. So that is why the church took them away. So getting now to this, to what my interviewee think about the veneration of the saints. So I have to say at this point that veneration of saints was not the main goal that I study, the main goal that I try to understand in the course of my interviews with my interviewees with priests and parishioners. So basically what I was trying to find out by doing these interviews was to understand how these priests and parishioners of this church that is represented as pro-Russia, how they explain to themselves why the Ukrainian society is so hostile to them, how they explain the reasons of this hostility, and what they're ready to change in their church in order to alleviate the public pressure, and whether they're ready to change anything at all. So it just so happened that in the course of our conversations, in the course of our interviews, many of them brought up this question of saints venerations, and basically practically all of them, when we talk about the saints veneration, they brought up the veneration of Nicholas and veneration of Alexander Nevsky. Probably they were influenced by this recent news that another church took these two saints away from its calendar, because I conducted my interviews during 2024, and practically after this decision made by this other church to take these saints away, against the backdrop of this public discussion that we should, stop venerating the saints and promote them in the Ukrainian public space. So basically, why I focus only on Nicholas and Alexander Nevsky is because these two saints were so these examples were brought up by my interviewees. So, which testifies, as I imagine, to the acuteness of this problem for them. So basically, because I'm running out of time, but basically what these people say, I just want to summarize a couple of observations. So the first thing, what they tried to do what they said to me when I talked with them about the veneration of Nevsky and Nicholas II, so mostly they tended to represent these two cults of saint as political cults. So the word, this word politics is very, very important and very emotionally loaded for the parishioners and priests of the Moscow Patriarchate in Ukraine for numerous of reasons. So basically, when in a conversation or interviews or whatever, they mention the word politics, they essentially mean something bad, something inherently evil, something that it has nothing to do, that should have nothing to do with the church daily life. So politics is always something bad. Politics is something secondary, something mundane, something profane, and that we should not do politics at church. We should forget about the politics. We should exercise the church from politics. So when they mark this cults of saint as political, they effectively, undermine the religious validity of this course. They undermine the religious legitimacy of this course. So mostly, this priests and parishioners with whom I spoke, they framed Nevsky and Nicholas as political saints, the saints who were like imposed on the Ukrainian church by political will of the Russian Empire. So, for example, this priest, he says, just let me collapse this Zoom icons because I don't see the quotation. So basically, this parishioner in this slide, he says basically that the canonization of the two were political, testified to some secular influences that, fostered political agenda on the church. So they delegitimize these two saints by saying they are like prompted by secular authorities, by political agenda, etc. So that is why it's no need to venerate them. So it's said that our church leaders, do nothing about it because these saints are political. And there was another example of how priests and parishioners use this concept of politics. So, for example, another parishioner with whom I spoke, to her, it was like unacceptable that there are some activists, some religious experts who go around and says basically that we should, get rid of these saints. And to her, the very idea that we should carve out some specific saints to designate them as Russian saints and get rid of them is a political thing. And as a result, something bad and something that we should not do. So veneration of Nicholas and Alexander has nothing to do with politics. The idea that we should exorcise them and get rid of them is political. So that's why we have to preserve them. So as you see, they use this politics in different ways. So on the one hand, there are people who say that the very idea that we should venerate them says is political, and that just means bad. The other says, no, we should venerate them because rejecting them and designating them as Russian means politics, the political approach. So we should not do that. Another thing that is going on with Alexander Nevsky is really interesting. And as you probably know, that since Peter the Great, Alexander Nevsky is mostly what historians call the military saint. So since Peter the Great, and especially since the middle of 18th century, Alexander Nevsky, it was important. It was a rule to picture him as a prince, as a warrior, as an Orthodox warrior, who protects the Russian lands against the foreign invaders. So the image was popularized by Peter the Great and then by the Holy Synod of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so this military image of Nevsky is something that many priests and parishioners of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church are now like very, very uneasy with. So they basically says, and in this quotation, this parishioner just is not this. He's not alone in voicing this concern. So he says basically that he was very uneasy because in his church he has this big icon of Alexander Nevsky, like of full human size. And I've been to this parish and they still have this icon, but he stands with the sword still hanging on the wall in his church. And he was like thinking that it might attract some undesirable attention from the religious activists who inspect the churches, the spiritual decolonizers. And so he went to see his parish priest to say, like, let's do something about it. Probably we should find some another saint to hang on the wall, so to speak. But his priest told him, and you can see that in the slide, that Alexander Nevsky is not really Alexander Nevsky. He is monk Alexei, or monk Alexei in Ukrainian, because in the last days or weeks of Alexander Nevsky's lives, he became a monk. So basically, the priest said that we should, venerate him as monk Alexei, not as prince or military leader Alexander. So let's find an icon of him without a sword, without this princely dress, but in monastic clothes. So to reframe Alexander Nevsky from military leader to a monk, and that's like a very interesting and very popular approach. So it's not only taking place at this grassroots level of parishes, but even the official calendar of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church quite recently, also in early 2024, they replaced the icon of Alexander Nevsky that they had before. So before they had the one you see in the slide to the left, where Alexander Nevsky was with his sword, so like protector, king protector, military leader. And now he is depicted as still Alexander Nevsky, yes, not monk Alexei, but he is essentially monk on this new icon that they use. And so the church leader tries to popularize, to champion this new icon instead to take place of an icon depicting Alexander Nevsky as a military leader. So this idea that we should demilitarize the Alexander Nevsky and his cult is like very popular among the parishioners and priests of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And even though it's hard to find these new icons, fully available at church shops, still priests and parishioners with whom I spoke, really says at least that they want to have them replaced and to have this icon of monk instead of a military leader, because monk could easily be venerated in the ongoing war, but the military leader who protected Russia from foreign invaders sounds like ambiguous to them and not palatable. And the last thing that I wanted to draw your attention to before too long is that it was, I heard it from many priests and parishioners, that it's not so much important for this particular saints like Alexander Nevsky or Nicholas II actually did as historical figures in their lives. So it is more important to venerate the example that they provide, the Christian example that they provide as saints. So this priest venerate royal family because it's a part of our history, and he venerates them because they are victims of communism, not because they are like emperor and etc. So the most of the controversy with it's not like a lot of icons of Nicholas II and his family, but mostly when there are icons of him, it's mostly this one that you see in the slides. So this icon of new martyrs, and it's like really popular, and many churches in Kyiv, even now, he has this icon. So the problem is that we have Nicholas and his family in a center. So, for example, many priests and parishioners try to find a new icon of new martyrs without this holy family in the middle. And so getting back to this idea that we should venerate the Christian example. So another examples to you in a slide, like that Alexander Nevsky is really monk Alexei, and we venerate him for his piety, for his Christian example, but not for the battle of ice, or that Nicholas II was a good family man, and we venerate this example of Christian life, Christian family life, but not some details about his rule, about his deeds as a historical figure. And this is one particular thing that I would like to conclude my presentation with, and it's not about particularly Nicholas II, but I really like the reasoning this priest gave me about veneration of saints. So he basically says that he gave me example of John of Kronstadt, Ivan Kronstadtski, and he said that this saint was actually Chernosotinets, so this like a radical, if we use the modern terminology, Russian nationalist of the early 20th century. And he said, like, well, yes, he was, but at the same time, he held divine service every day. He was a great priest, and I venerate him for that, not for his political views or his political deeds, etc. So what I try to sum up at this point is that it leads me to ask this question: is how commemoration of certain historical figures is different in a way from the veneration of some saints. Because from this grassroots perspective, when, for example, we talk about the commemoration, for example, of Stepan Bandera, yes, so the leader of the Ukrainian nationalists of the mid-20th century. So people don't actually commemorate his deeds. They commemorate the examples he provides. They commemorate some specific anti-Russian sentiments that he provides. The same thing we could see with this attitudes to veneration of Nicholas II and Alexander Nevsky. So I understand that these priests and preachers try to protect themselves, symbolically, discursively protect themselves from this idea that we should, this church promotes pro-Russian narratives, etc. But at the same time, he say basically the same thing. Yeah, we should commemorate not some specific details of what they've done, but the examples that they provide. So these saints are role models that they try to imitate. I'm sorry for overtaking time. I would stop here, and I do hope that we can discuss a little bit more about that during the discussion. So thank you for listening so patiently and not interrupting me, even though I deserve it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrei. So please save your questions for the discussion. And we are moving to our second presenter, Lubava Illyenko. Since 2006, she has studied art history in Kyiv. As the assistant of the curator, she worked in Izolyatsia, platform for cultural initiatives in Donetsk and Kyiv. Since 2018, Lubava Illyenko has been a graduate student in art history at the University of Augsburg in Germany. She is currently working there on her PhD thesis on the monumental mosaic art of Soviet Ukraine. Lubava, the floor is yours. We have around 20-25 minutes, so please.
Okay, thank you very much. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I'm very pleased to have a word here. Thank you for having me here. And I would like to say that my ongoing dissertation is completely another. And this research that I'm making right now is like the first steps in my postdoc research, I hope. The story is the following. In my ongoing dissertation, Ukrainian mosaics of the Soviet era, I come across the fact that many ancient mosaics, many old mosaics before the Soviet Union, or the best of them, do not belong to Ukraine anymore. And in the wave of current decolonisation, it struck me, of course. A few examples can illustrate this situation. Okay, can you see my presentation? Yes? Yes. For over a century and a half ago, for example, Count Alexei Uvarov started his excavations of Chersones in Crimea. In focus were Byzantine studies of the south of Russia. And Chersones was the perfect ancient town for this. In 1853, he discovered the Bishop's Basilica, a very rare monument of the early phase of Christianity in Kherson. And the next year, Uvarov excavated the largest and the best preserved mosaic floor of the South Isle. He moved this mosaic to the Hermitage, which was recently opened as a public museum in Russia. Beside it, the most valuable capitals, marble parts, and other architectural details were also transferred to the Imperial Museum. The floor was divided a few years later. Yes, the floor was divided, recomposed, and adjusted to the Hall of Antiquities. Some parts were duplicated and added to the pavement because the dimension of the floor in the Hermitage was a little bit larger. It was 130 square meters, and it was larger than the size of the excavated mosaic. So we have lost initial composition of this mosaic floor, And for example, we also don't know where the memorization or this votive inscription was located before. It can be translated like it is Greek inscription, and it's very rare because it's a votive inscription which says praying for Malch and his people. It was in the excavation report of Varov, it was not indicated where was this inscription before. Anyway, the composition and everything is lost. This mosaic floor is really important because this pavement belongs to the scope of the early Byzantine floor mosaics, common in the Mediterranean in the 5th and the 6th century. And there are really not so many of them, especially of this size and this quality of preservation. This mosaic can be compared only with the pavement of the cross-plan church, known as the church outside the city walls, which was discovered in 1902 by Karl Kostyuszka Waluszczyniec. And this floor was excavated a bit later during the Soviet authorities in 1953 and placed into the open-air yard of Chersones Museum. But because of the poor condition of preservation in the open air, it was removed again in 2002, already in independent Ukraine, and stored in repository of the museum. Unfortunately, already before annexation of Crimea. This amateur archaeologist, Karl Kostyuszka Waluszczyniec, is really interesting for us because he's played a crucial role in the study of Chersones architecture. He excavated really a lot there, like 20 churches and chapels, hundreds of tombs, hundreds of streets and the walls of Chersones, but also he founded this store of local antiquities. And this is like a really rare case because he was dreaming of making museum there on the territory of Ukraine, no, on the territory of South Province. But I can, he organized a kind of repository of the collection I cite. Those were not intended to be sent to St. Petersburg. So there were some plans, and of him, of course, to create a museum there. But the Imperial Archaeological Commission never had a task to create any museum, to create any permanent collection or exhibition in situ or in Ukrainian province. This main archaeological foundation in Russia had another task. For example, its head, Count Alexei Babrinsky, wrote in 1906, "In recent years, my commission has de facto become the main supplier of Hermitage." So the system aimed to excavate as many interesting antiquities as possible and transfer them to St. Petersburg, Hermitage, or to the Museum of Russian History in Moscow. The main criteria of success and funding, of course, because the Imperial Russia give finance for this, the main criterion was significant archaeological findings, and they were all the time transferred in Russia. For example, we know that our Uvarov Basilica had the mosaic pavement and also in the north chapel. But I'm citing, because of the cold weather and snowfall, Uvarov did not carry out the excavation, so it was lost forever. Of course, one can argue auch if the first floor was not excavated, had not been excavated, it would be definitely also destroyed. But actually, this is this colonization paradox of this colonial situation. On the one hand, the imperial authorities promoted the protection and study of antiquities, and especially of the South Russian antiquities, because the biggest part of financial was aimed to the south of Russia, to the excavation of south of Russia, and Khersones especially. So the imperial authorities promoted the protection and study of antiquities, like those in Tavrik, Khersones. But on the other hand, the Russian government did not establish a single local museum, and all Ukrainian initiatives to do so and carry out scientific novel research were banned. For example, in Kyiv, there was attempts and so on. As a result, most valuable antiquities of Paleolithic, Scythian, Slavic, Old Russian times, which was excavated in Crimea, Kyiv Oblast, Poltava, Katerinoslav, Chernigiv Oblast, and other regions of modern Ukraine were taken to the Russian museums, like Hermitage, like the State Russian Museum in Petersburg, Kremlin Armory, State Historical Museum of Russia in Moscow, and. The total quality of the transferred artifacts is unknown, but there are thousands of hundreds of them. I would like to show you one data project of an independent Ukrainian media, the Stolen Treasures, where they really estimated how, because we are saying it's a lot of them, plenty of them, but how many they tried to calculate really in practice. I should admit that this study excluded work of art, icons, and weapons because of their entangled provenance. It also excluded the items which were looted during the current war. So we're speaking only about this imperial and Soviet times. This analysis covered online collection of two principal Russian museums, the Hermitage State Museum or Hermitage State Museum and the State Historical Museum of Russia in Moscow. Nonetheless, it revealed 100,000 artifacts that had been transferred from the territory of Ukraine in different historical periods. The study unfolded 32,000 artifacts in Hermitage and 77,000 in the State Historical Museum. We should also keep in mind that it was only a research of online collections of these museums, yes? So, for example, the Hermitage online data constitutes only 30% of the whole their collection. And the State Historical Museum, they have about only 50% of their whole collection. So we can estimate that each institution possesses at least twice as many as it were calculated here. I will try to show also the, can you see the online, the website? Yes, right now?
Print screen of the website. Your presentation only.
My presentation only. Right, I will try to do another way. For example, I want to show you this website, and they visualize only some of these world famous treasures from Ukraine. We can see Lita Могила, the foundings from Khersones, from Kul-Oba, so this is a famous Scythian treasure. Also Kul-Oba, a lot of gold. This famous treasures, which Alexander Mount or Lubava Могила, Чортомлик treasure, Цимбалова Могила, Nymphanon, also Nymphanon. So they made some visualization, yeah, Berezan Inselt, Ovitova Могила, Agus, Salocha, Kurgan, Borodino treasure, and some other. So we will come back to our presentation. Yes, so enrichment of the museums was not the main goal as well. In the 19th centuries, Imperial Russia popularized the myth of the trinity of the Russian people. They say that Ukrainians, Belarusians, and Russians are not separate ethnic group, but a single Russian people, you know, all that. It means that Muscovy was the legal successor of Kievan Rus. According to the concept of Trinity, the entire Ukrainian cultural heritage was imperial common property, and as such, it was transferred to the Central Russian Museum. The Imperial Archaeological Commission only legalized this transfer. And as we see, for example, in June 1887, Praskovya Uvarova, who was also the Russian archaeologist, he wrote to the Alexander III command, Your Majesty, and the ancient Chersones will become a Russian Pompeii. I should admit that since the annexation of Crimea, this quotation is very, very, very oft common sound in media and on the website of Chersones Museum as well. This comparison and the myth of the Chersones and the myth that the Chersones was the cradle of Orthodoxy is actively used, of course, nowadays by Russia. The same way, another identity symbol of Orthodoxy was transferred from Ukraine, but many centuries ago. The Vyshgorod icon of the Mother of God was renamed into Our Lady of Vladimir, and right now is on display in the Tretyakov Gallery in Moscow. So the history is the following. In about 1131, the Greek Patriarch of Constantinople sent this icon as a gift to the Grand Prince Yuri Dolgorukiy, and this icon was stored in Vyshgorod near Kyiv, and was considered the treasure of Orthodox Kievan Rus. In 1155, the icon was taken by the Prince of Volodymyr Suzdal, Andrei Bogolyubsky, during his raid on Vyshgorod. But in the guidebook of the State Tretyakov Gallery today, it is written that the icon was just brought to Rus from Byzantium. That's all. It's interesting also that some even consider this icon to be a national palladium or safety amulet for Moscow, since it appeared to be in Moscow, with several miracles of historical or veneration, several miracles of historical importance to Russia being attributed to this icon. So it saved Moscow from this and from that, and since icon is in Moscow, nothing can happen with the Moscow. So is the part of veneration of this icon. So this piece was integrated into the Russian cultural chronotype. So we can see the way how it's happened. Some treasures are looted, are transferred, then they are renamed, like the Uvarov Basilica or Uvarov mosaic floor, like this Virgin of Vladimir. They are renamed and integrated into the domain of Russian culture. Now, these both examples, for example, these both artifacts are items of Russian inheritage, and we cannot do anything with it. There was also another way to obtain the Ukrainian treasures. Imperial Russia and Soviet Russia practiced the way of loaning of art objects for exhibitions and never returning them back. The most infamous crime is the case of the mosaic panel from the Church of Archangel Michael in Kyiv, this St. Demetrius of Thessaloniki mosaic panel. This is the history. After the capital of the Soviet Ukraine was transferred from Kharkov to Kyiv in 1934, the Soviet authorities decided to demolish several buildings, including this St. Michael gold-domed cathedral in the center, to build a new government center. Before the demolition, before the explosion, because this monastery was exploded afterwards, before the demolishing, all the mosaics or the main mosaics and frescoes of the cathedral were dismantled and given to the exposition and collection of the Lavra, preserved in Kyiv. And few years later, in 1938, this mosaic, another relief, and several frescoes were borrowed by the State Tretyakov Gallery for a temporary exhibition, the tale of the Igor's campaign, Slova полку Igorеве. And since then, they never come back. It's also interesting that during the Second World War, almost all the frescoes of these cathedrals, they were taken to Germany, and when the Germany had made its restitution, they were all restituted in Moscow. And Moscow distributed all these items and other frescoes and other reliefs and other mosaics between several museums in USSR, but not in Kyiv. It was Novgorod and Leningrad. So since then, a lot of attempts to bring them back were made. And provenance research discovered 25 artifacts from Kyiv Mikhail Cathedral on the territory of Russian Federation. Due to the expertise and activity of Ukrainian historian Sergei Kot, which unfortunately died just in the beginning of the Russian full-scale invasion, 11 frescoes were returned in Kyiv in 2004. So he is the biggest prominent expert in this field, and he did everything that at least the part of these old Russian treasures would be returned, and they were, but not all of them. And St. Demetrius mosaic is still the property of Russian state. This monograph is in Ukrainian language, is the first complex study of looted artifacts from Ukraine and attempts of their restitution. And I found here not only this chronicle of looting, but also the answer to the question, since what moment in history it is reasonable and acceptable for Ukraine to claim their repatriation. And because there can be some historical events, like with the Vyshgorod icon, or it can be intentional looting. So Sergei Kot offers us to take the beginning of the 18th century. At that time, he writes, in Russia appeared interest in antiquities and archaeological excavation. As a result, there also began their research, private collection, and founding of the first public museums. Society at the beginning of 18th century relies the scientific and social significance of artifacts of history and culture, and the need to identify, record, protect, and preserve them. Therefore, the intentional excavation and expropriation of treasures from colonial Ukrainian lands became possible and became popular. Since then, the process has acquired a systematic, organized, and intentional character. Since then, the looting of values cannot be excused by incidental historical discord or to be considered a trophy of particular historical event. So in this chronological frame, the restitution claim can be established or can be made the attempts to establish the future restitutional claims. And from our side, from the side of us as Ukrainian scientists and Ukrainian academia, especially right now during the war, when the museums are rudely looted now and the monuments are destroyed, it's extremely important to start this work, to continue this attempt of restitution. And some efforts are already done. For example, like this campaign of the archaeological heritage, Archaeological Heritage, Archaeological Society of Ukraine. I have demonstrated only the few cases and examples of this process. And I hope to continue. Thank you very much. There are some sources which I used. I hope I was in time.
Somebody have some questions to ask to our presenters? Okay. Maybe tight. I have a little question for my part, for Lubava. You discuss about this traditional practice to take all object from archaeological works to the center of empire without to put in the local museum. In fact, maybe it's interesting to know this kind of parallel in Afghanistan and in Iran. There are a lot of contracts between France, between Germany, and it's in all of this convention where noted that France must and have the possibility to take to Paris all discovery. And I think maybe it's interesting to compare. It's not, for me, it's not really the Russian practice, but it's the common practice for all museum in this period. And it's enough to go to the British Library, to the Louvre, and see this the big presentation of the art of whole world. But I don't know, do you see or not this kind of convention between about this territory in Ukraine, because it's not the recognized colony in 19th century. It's not Afghanistan and France, not Iran and France. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I will check it, definitely. Thank you very much. And I cannot find how I can raise my hand here to ask make some comment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can I make some comment? Okay. Yes?
Yes.
Oh, yes, I have found it. Yes. Yes, I found this hand. So I have a little maybe comment for Andriy, because I was researching a lot this Lenino part and Pushkina part, and I like so much the comment. I like this so much the note of Konstantin Akinsha about this Pushkin statuary. And I think it was the last Wien conference of human science, where Konstantin Akinsha was given something about cultural front, and he remarked that this Pushkin statues in Ukraine, in Estonia, in Hungary, everywhere, or even in Africa, this is like an interesting way to mark the territory with the cultural means, to demonstrate the presence of Russian civilization. And this is unique situation because no other colony had made this. We cannot imagine Great Britain putting the statue of Shakespeare somewhere in Egypt or in India, for example. But Russians will make it. And this is interesting sign of recognition when this de-Russification has started. And de-Russification have faced this presence of Russian civilization as the statuary of Pushkin. And this is a very interesting sign of Russian presence, because now our colony was making it. And about the one more little comment, maybe it will also be interesting for Andrei, about some venerations and some interpretations of saints for the political sake. Because, for example, I know the case of Saint Ingi-Gerga, who is venerated in Ukraine and who is venerated in Russia. But in 2000, there was a very comic story, because in 2009 in Kyiv, the scientists, they opened the grave of Yaroslav the Wise, Ярослава Мудрого, вскрыли могилу в Софиевском монастыре, and they found there the rest of a woman who is considered to be the wife of Yaroslav the Wise, this Saint Ingi-Gerga, who was the daughter of Swedish prince and aunt. And interesting that they say, now Ukrainians say that they have the real rests of this Saint Ingi-Gerga, and the Russian, they have also in Novgorod monastery, they have also the rest of this saint woman. And now they have in Russian is venerating the one rest, Moshi, the one rest of this Ingi-Gerga, and in Ukraine are venerated completely different rests of this Ingi-Gerga. And Ukrainians are claimed that their rests are the right one because they are older, and after the смерть Ярослава Мудрого, these are the настоящие мощи. So it's interesting and a little bit comic case study.
Thank you very much, Lubava. I don't know if Andrei would like to replicate or...
Probably I'll save time. Let other people who raise their hands, to ask.
If you want, we can put all questions together to have what we have. Alexander, you have some things?
Yeah, thank you. I've got a question for Andrei. I would say that actually there are two questions, two related questions. First one is how this understanding, your understanding, I don't know what word to choose of the saints are understood in various parts of Ukraine. Are there any differences between various parts of Ukraine, as you can observe? And the second question is about how this understanding of these figures, your understanding as a new depoliticized, maybe demilitarized understanding of these figures, are known, are understood, are widespread among various parts of community in different generation and maybe gender, but I don't know if it's possible to to find out. Thank you very much once again.
And we have another question from Maria.
Yes. Do you hear me well?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much. My question is basically about heritage and empire in general. So it's more of a question for Lubava, I guess, but also for the public. Of what do you think should come first when we are considering the museums and the states giving back the artifacts to their former colonies where they were spoiled. We can see the examples with Britain and with France. There was this recent film, Daume, the Gamea, about the travel of the artifacts back from France to the country of African country of origin. And I would like to ask you, what do you think in Russian case should come first? The Russian state reconsidering one day its relationships with its former colonies, like Ukraine and others, and giving back the artifacts via this more, I guess, in a way, political route? Or can it come by the museums? Like, I think, maybe I'm wrong, maybe you will correct me. That's what happened in a way in France now, and if maybe in Britain too, where it's not the whole role of British Empire or French Empire that is completely reconsidered, where the state says, yes, we were wrong, sorry, please take back your artifacts. That's not what's happening. But the museums by themselves, with a lot of work that lasts for years, if I understand correctly, there are ways of giving at least some of those artifacts back. What do you think? Well, we don't know what the future reserves us, but which way, for the Russian case or in general, is something that we can imagine or something that happens frequently? Thank you very much. And I understand that it's a very difficult question.
Yes, thank you. I think it's better to take the question from Paris. Yeah, it is the floor for Paris.
Okay, who's first?
Maybe I have a question to.
Can you hear us? Or do you need to...
But if you can go to the computer, it will be better.
You'll have a microphone.
So I believe, as far as I understood, so the one of your topic was to relate to the question or the issue of national identity and faith. And I'd like to inquire how representative was your questionnaire. So because the answers that you presented on this slide, they looked a bit biased. So as if you questioned only the parishioners of Russian Orthodox Church, or the church that has a strong belonging and relations with Russian tradition and Russian narratives. Should you inquire and should you ask so the representatives of Ukrainian society, so from different churches, do you expect to get, what kind of answers do you expect to get, so concerning these relations between identity and belonging to the church, identity and faith? Wow.
Thank you very much.
How would you assess these relations?
Yeah, thank you.
Maybe a short question. So, and concerning the de-Russification and demilitarization, don't you substitute this topic of icons or the symbolic aspect of icons with the more fundamental one, so the real belonging and the relationships between the two churches, well, two communities? Wow.
Andrei, maybe it's your turn now, if you have some things to respond.
Yes, well, I have things to respond. Obviously, I've been asked questions. First of all, Lubava, thank you for the comments and for suggestions. I've never actually studied this case of Ingi Gerda, and I didn't even know she was recognized as saint and is venerated. So it's interesting to explore that. But obviously, it was not part of my research. And yes, I use this Pushkin and Lenin, Pushkin part and Lenin part as rather an illustrative background, because many respondents actually, when we talked about the saints veneration, many of them brought this topic up in this broader context of, look what is going on with the monuments, look what is going on with our memory, like it's been erased or something like that. So it appeared in this broader context of a Leninopad and Pushkinopad, of decommunization that started in 2015. So many of them are, when they were talking about the veneration of saints, they mentioned this broader context and to say their attitudes about it. So it was only, so I was not interested in studying this particular processes, but I understand it was important for my respondents, for these interviewees with whom I spoke, to present what they had to present in this broader context. For example, there was one funny example. I didn't put it in the slide because the quotation would be quite too long to, I have no idea how to condense it properly, but essentially what this parishioner said to me, it's a woman like above 60 years old, and she's like, so she is an embodiment of contradiction. So she is like, she's really for having Ukrainian language for the church services, because this church that I discussed with you, it had the church communal prayers in Church Slavonic, not in Ukrainian. So she wants to have Ukrainian language. She likes the idea of in church independence from Moscow. So she doesn't want to have anything to do with Moscow and with Russia, etc. She lives near the Russian border between Ukraine and Russia. But at the same time, when we brought this topic of Nicholas and Alexander Nevsky and Matrona Moskovskaya and all this sort of stuff, she said something like, oh, yes, obviously I venerate these people. They're saints. They're great Christian examples. I like these saints, and I also like Pushkin, and I also like Nekrasov. So I didn't ask her to go into this direction of Pushkin, Nekrasov, and all these Russian writers, but she nevertheless, by telling me about her attitudes to veneration of the saints, she brought about this aspect of Russian writers who is not very popular, as you can imagine, at the moment. So it's something like that. So, but that was not part of my research. I mean, the study of Leninopad and Pushkinopad, there are numerous fantastic studies that has been done over the last years and is currently ongoing. So I leave it to these fantastic researchers and scholars to do something about that. To the questions of Alexander, the first one is about these differences between different regions of Ukraine. So actually, I have no observed so far any differences in how these saints are perceived. But then again, like I said, these interviewees, my respondents, whom I interview, are a representative sample. So it's not a full-fledged sociological study where you have a representative sample, so you can observe any regional differences and with some sort of validity. So I haven't observed any sort of differences between the different regions. So if we talk about some outsiders, about this public perception of these saints venerated by this church, so it's, to me, are the same possibly in all regions, because you can see numerous news both from Dnipropetrovsk region, which is closer to the front line, and from some westernmost regions like Volhynia, where people are outraged by seeing Nicholas II in the church or seeing the parish. So my goal was to understand how this public pressure forces this priests and parishioners to rethink or think about these saints. So, but I haven't observed so far no regional differences. Probably they exist, but unfortunately I haven't seen them in my study. And yes, about how this demilitarized picture of Alexander Nevsky is being perceived. And you see, the funny thing about that mostly all those who talked about this idea that we need to demilitarize Alexander Nevsky, we need to present him in another way, were mostly voiced by men. So men were like really interesting to talk about these topics, and women, on the other hand, were like very reluctant to touch upon this topic at all. So mostly these ideas were from men and women. When we came to this point and talked about the saints' venerations, they mostly resort to these ideas like all saints, the saints of the church, saints of the Christ and we have to venerate them. Probably there were some mistakes in canonizations, but it's not up to us to decide and to discuss this sort of topic. So let's venerate them, and then when war is over, then we will get back to this, and probably church leaders will think about that because they have proper education, etc. So it was mostly from priests and mostly from the male parishioners this ideas came from. So that's only one observation that I can give you as a response to your questions. And to the questions, I'm sorry, I haven't heard your name from Paris. Yes, so you understand what I'm talking about. So that results of this survey that I presented in a slide, it's not the survey that I conducted about this relations between religious identity, but orthodoxy and national identity. So it's not only, it's a full-fledged sociological study was conducted by a group of researchers like a couple of years ago, and it's not only about this church that has, as you put it, some pro-Russia attitudes and pro-Russia traditions. It's a general study of the Ukrainian society. So the numbers that were presented in the slide, I mean, there's above 50% of people who says that Orthodoxy is very or somewhat important for them to be truly Ukrainian. It's not only about this church, it's about the Ukrainian population in general. And I should also add that many sociological agencies that do this annual studies into the religiosity, they also have this observation, so that people says that Orthodoxy is important for them, important for their national identity. So it's about the Ukrainian society at large, in broader sense, not only about this church. So, and when we talk about this, particularly these church attitudes and the people who belong to this church attitudes to the question of nationality and to the question of national belonging and all this sort of stuff, it's rather very complex question, and I don't know how to answer to it properly in this short, limited time. So there are like numerous things that we have to take into account. So if at very basic level, so the people in this church were like in this constant contradiction, because the church leader, so if we talk from this top-down perspective, so the church leaders of this particular church, they have in this always preserve this balance. So on the one hand, they have to explain to themselves and to their parishes why they still remain the part of the Russian Orthodox Church. But at the same time, they also have to legitimize that they're truly Ukrainian church, not some pro-Russia entity doing some sneaky work here in Ukraine. And in this contradiction, they've been like for many years, since like the end of the World War II. So it's really neat. In order to answer your questions, we have to get through these top-down projects that the church leaders created in order to explain these things, in order to justify these things. But generally, if we take a look from this top-down perspective, it was the idea to downplay this national dimension, to say that it's not important that we belong to the Ukrainian nation or the Russian nation or whatever else nation. The issue is that we belong to some supranational Christian church, and the church has no nation, something like that. But at the same time, there are like many interesting pitfalls that we might meet on our way. And I have an article about it, actually, about how this particular church tells its history and how this correlates with the history of Russia and with the history of Ukraine. But I can send it to you after that, because it's really would be like time consuming to get into that detail. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lubava, I think if it's you have 5 minutes.
Yes, I'll through. Thank you very much. I'll through. I'm of course not. No, I'm not ready to answer if the restitution somehow happened from what and how it will be started. But I would like to just give one observation which I made while preparing myself for their seminar here in Germany in Augsburg. And we had the seminar about restitution from Germany side, from America and Germany after the Second World War. And I was given some points about Russia, about restitution, and I was surprised. It's something really, really, really wrong on unfair even in Russian vocabulary. There are no term of trophies, Second World trophies in Russia. They call it like transferred values, перемещенные ценности. So they are even not recognized that this is, in Russia, is not recognized that this is the trophies of the Second World War. It's only transferred values, and the losses of Russia was so huge that we cannot compare it with these small values from Germany, which was taken by the Soviet troops. And so, and we are witnessing right now, I don't know how it describes, some huge crisis of whole Russian cultural model, which is already there like more than a century, like looting the sub-colonial things, and they still do it with some other North Russian folks, not Russian people, and ethnicities. So this is really something wrong with the whole, and something unfair with the whole system. And it doesn't matter from what side of restitution or from what cultural heritage we are trying to look at this system. Is it German Russian culture or Ukrainian, or I don't know, some North people of Russia?
Thank you very much. I think we don't have more time to discuss. It was very interesting, very exciting, and I think very useful for all of us.